The girl they called worthless could read the forest like a book, but tonight, the story it told was a nightmare. She knelt in the mud, rain plastering her hair to her face, studying the ground with an intensity that bordered on prayer. The world saw a 16-year-old orphan, a stray dog to be kicked or ignored. But out here, in the wild heart of the frontier, Willa Shepherd was a scholar of the unspoken language of broken twigs and disturbed earth. She had survived years of this, learning to hunt, to track, to disappear, all just to draw her next breath in a town that wished she'd just stopped breathing. Tonight, though, she wasn't tracking a deer for her next meal. She was tracking a child. The footprints were small, swallowed by the mud, but they screamed a story of pure terror. They didn't lead in a straight line. They circled, spiraled, as if the 6-year-old was trapped in a dizzying maze of fear. Deeper and deeper into the woods, the prints grew frantic, desperate. Willa saw where small hands had clawed at the bark of an old oak, trying to pull a terrified body upright. She pressed her ear to a fallen log, closing her eyes, listening past the howl of the wind for a sound that didn't belong. A whimper, a cry, anything. Years of sleeping with one eye open had honed her senses to a razor's edge. She noticed the way the squirrels had vanished, how the birds had fallen silent. The forest was holding its breath. A predator was near. Her eyes, sharp from spotting rabbits in deep shadow, caught a flash of color. A tiny scrap of torn deerskin snagged on a thorn bush. Below it, on a single broad leaf, was a drop of blood, dark and terrifyingly fresh. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. A storm was tearing through the mountains, the kind of black-hearted monster that could fell trees and turn creeks into raging rivers. These woods were home to wolves, mountain cats, and things men whispered about around campfires. But the image of those panicked, circular footprints was burned into her mind. They reminded her of another lost child years ago. Small, cold, alone, with no one coming to help. That child had been her. The trail grew more urgent. The blood drops became a steady, gruesome breadcrumb trail, leading her deeper into the suffocating darkness. The wind shrieked like a banshee, and the dawn was a lifetime away. But one thought, hard and sharp as a flint arrowhead, drove her forward. This little girl would not die alone in the woods, not tonight, not while Willa was still breathing. She had been trying to steal a few eggs from the coop behind the old abandoned trading post when the shouting started. It wasn't the sound of angry settlers. This was different. Through the broken slats of the coop she saw them. Warriors from the tribal settlement that clung to the edge of the valley, their faces carved with a raw, primal panic. Willa shrank back against the rotting wood, making herself small. Trouble in this town always found its way to orphans. They were the first to be blamed, the last to be helped. "Ayana!" The cry ripped through the air, raw and broken. "Ayana! Where are you?" An older man, his face a mask of anguish, stumbled into the clearing. His braids were soaked with rain, his hands clenched into fists of pure despair. Behind him, 3 younger warriors fanned out, their voices joining his, calling the girl's name into the storm. Willa had seen them in town. They came to trade furs for flour and salt, their faces proud and distant, never mixing with the settlers who viewed them with a mixture of fear and contempt. They were a people apart, and Willa, in her own way, was too. The man collapsed to his knees in the mud, pressing his face into his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. One of the warriors placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking in their native tongue. Willa didn't know their language, but she knew the language of loss. She caught enough words to piece together the horror. A child was missing, a little girl named Ayana. Wandered away during the evening meal. Vanished into the woods. Thunder cracked overhead, a whip crack of sound that made the ground tremble. The rain, which had been a steady drumming, became a torrential downpour. Willa watched the search party move toward the forest's edge, their torches sputtering, their calls growing fainter as they were swallowed by the trees. They were heading in the wrong direction. She knew these woods better than the men who were born here. She had made them her home when the town had made it clear she had no other. She knew the secret paths, the hidden shelters, the places a scared child might run to. She knew where the ground gave way to sinkholes, where the wolves made their dens. The smart thing to do was stay put. Wait for morning. Stay out of it. The tribe had never offered her a kind word, and the townspeople would hang this on her if the girl wasn't found. She was an inconvenience, a ghost everyone was waiting to see vanish for good. But as she huddled in the darkness, the sound of that father's grief echoed in her own hollow chest. She remembered being 6, shivering in a barn, crying for a mother and father who were never coming back. She remembered the gnawing hunger, the crushing weight of being utterly alone in a world that had no place for her. The rain was coming down harder now, a solid sheet of water that was washing away every track, every scent. In an hour, the trail would be gone forever. The warriors were searching the main game trail, the logical path an adult would take. But a scared child doesn't think logically. They run from the dark toward what they think is light, even if it leads them straight into the jaws of something worse. Willa took a ragged breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and slipped out from behind the chicken coop. The storm wasn't waiting. A choice had to be made. And somewhere out there in the screaming dark, a little girl was facing the same storm, all alone. The warriors' torches were gone, swallowed by the trees to the east. Willa waited until the last echo of their calls faded, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She'd tracked countless animals through this forest, but this was different. This was a soul. She began where the warriors should have, at the very edge of the tribal camp, her eyes scanning the ground for the slightest disturbance. The rain was a curse, turning the earth to soup, but it hadn't washed everything away. Not yet. A bent blade of grass, a single overturned stone. Then, sheltered beneath the lip of a large rock, a perfect, partial footprint. It was small, barefoot, the toes splayed wide. A running print. The child had been sprinting, blind with fear, and the direction it pointed made Willa's stomach clench into a cold, hard knot. It pointed straight toward Dead Man's Canyon. "No," she whispered, the wind stealing the word from her lips. "Not there." She pushed deeper into the woods, every nerve alight. Her survival wasn't just a collection of tricks, it was an instinct, a second nature. When the footprints vanished on hard, rocky ground, she looked for the subtle signs. A leaf turned the wrong way, a single strand of dark hair caught on a low branch. The girl had been crashing through the undergrowth, not following any path, just running from something. 1/2 a mile in, she found it. The piece of torn deerskin caught on a thorn. But now she saw the dark stain spreading across it was much larger than she first thought, and below it, a smear of blood on the tree trunk itself. Ayanna had fallen or been thrown against the tree. Hard. She was hurt, maybe badly, but she had gotten up and kept running. The trail now veered sharply south into the most feared part of the forest. Willa herself avoided this place, a treacherous maze of hidden ravines and loose shale that could give way without warning. In the daylight, it was a death trap. In a storm-racked night, it was suicide. The voice in her head, the one that had kept her alive for so long, screamed at her to turn back, to save herself. She ignored it. The blood drops were more frequent now, painting a grim path on the wet leaves. The footprints staggered, showing the child was tiring, stumbling, running blind through a landscape designed to kill. Lightning split the sky, a brilliant, terrifying flash that bleached the world white for a second. And in that second, Willa saw it. The world dropped away in front of her. At the edge of the precipice, the earth was torn, gouged. Fresh slide marks ran down a steep, muddy slope into absolute blackness. And at the bottom of the marks, almost invisible in the gloom, lay a single, small moccasin. The child had gone over the edge. She had fallen into Devil's Hollow. Willa knew the place by its reputation, a deep stone bowl carved into the earth, surrounded by sheer cliffs. During a storm, the runoff from the entire mountain funneled into it, turning the bottom into a raging, inescapable cauldron. If Ayanna was down there, injured and trapped, she didn't have until dawn. She had an hour, maybe less. The rising water would be her grave. Willa stared down into the black pit, the rain on her face indistinguishable from tears. She had found the child, but finding her and saving her were two very different things. Willa worked by feel in the darkness, her fingers numb with cold. She unslung her rope, a pathetic thing, really, just strips of leather and scavenged cloth braided together over lonely nights. It was barely 20 feet long, but it was all she had. She found the thickest tree near the edge, its roots digging deep into the stone, and tied the rope off, testing the knot again and again until her raw fingers bled. It would have to hold. The descent into Devil's Hollow was a controlled fall. Loose rocks and mud cascaded down around her, splashing into the unseen water below. Thorny vines, hidden in the dark, ripped at her clothes and skin, tearing long, shallow cuts across her arms and face. Halfway down, her boot slipped on a patch of wet moss. For one heart-stopping second, she swung out over the abyss, the makeshift rope groaning in protest, the friction burning through her leather gloves. Below her, the sound of the water was louder now, a hungry roar. Her feet found purchase again. She scrambled the rest of the way down, landing in ankle-deep, frigid water. "Ayanna!" she called out, her voice barely a whisper against the storm. "Ayanna, can you hear me?" A faint whimper answered her, from a dense thicket of thorns near the base of the far wall. Willa pushed through the tangled mess, the thorns tearing at her, not even feeling the pain. The water was deeper here, already swirling around her calves, the current surprisingly strong. She found the little girl huddled against a massive boulder, her small body shaking uncontrollably from cold and shock. Her face was pale, her lips blue. Blood oozed from a dozen cuts on her arms and legs, and her left ankle was swollen to the size of a melon. But her eyes were open. She was alive. "It's okay," Willa said, her voice softer than she thought possible. She knelt in the rising water beside her. "I'm here to help. Your father sent me." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The fear in the child's eyes lessened, replaced by a flicker of hope. Ayanna tried to move, to stand, and let out a sharp cry of pain, grabbing her injured ankle. It was clearly broken. She wasn't climbing out of here, she wasn't even walking. Willa's eyes darted around the stone prison. The water was rising faster now, carrying sticks and debris, swirling around her knees. Her rope, dangling from above, was useless. There was no way she could carry an injured child up that sheer, slippery cliff face. They were trapped. Thunder exploded directly overhead, and in the lingering flash of lightning, Willa saw the mark that sealed their fate. A dark, horizontal line stained the boulder beside them, a good 4 feet above their heads. A watermark from a previous flood. If this storm didn't let up, this entire hollow was going to fill like a bathtub. "We have to get higher," Willa said, trying to keep the terror out of her voice. She scanned the walls again, desperately searching for an answer. There. About 8 feet up the far wall, a narrow ledge, barely a foot wide. It wasn't an escape, but it might buy them time. But the rock face leading to it was slick with rain, offering almost no handholds. Climbing it alone would be hard enough. Climbing it with a child on her back. Impossible. The water was at her thighs now, the current trying to sweep her feet out from under her. Ayanna looked up at her, her wide dark eyes filled with a terrifying, absolute trust. She believed Willa could save her, and Willa had no idea how. She took a deep breath, the icy water stealing her warmth, and looked at the wall again. There had to be a way. There had to be something she was missing, because giving up meant leaving this child to drown in the dark. Another flash of lightning gave her the answer. For a split second, an ancient tree root system was illuminated, exposed in the wall of the hollow. Years of erosion had washed the dirt away, leaving the thick, gnarled roots hanging like a grotesque ladder. They were slick with moss and rain, and might not hold their combined weight, but they were the only chance they had. The water was now a powerful, churning torrent at her waist. A dead branch swirled past, slamming into her leg. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the current became too strong to stand against. "I'm going to carry you," she told Ayana, crouching low in the water. "Hold on to my neck. Tight." The child wrapped her small, cold arms around Willa's shoulders, her body trembling. Willa waded to the base of the wall and grabbed the lowest root, pulling with all her weight. It held. She began to climb, her worn boots scrabbling for purchase on the wet stone, the child's dead weight a terrible burden. Each upward pull was a battle, her muscles screaming in protest. The roots were slimy and her grip kept slipping. Halfway to the ledge, disaster. A thick root she was clinging to tore loose from the wall with a sickening ripping sound. A shower of dirt and rock rained down. Willa swung violently to the side, her shoulder smashing against the cliff face, the impact stealing her breath. Ayana screamed, her grip tightening like a vice around Willa's throat, choking her. "It's all right," Willa gasped, her vision swimming with black spots. "We're almost there." She found another handhold, a knot of smaller roots, and kept climbing. One foot, then the other. Her arms felt like lead, her lungs burned. The ledge was just inches above her head now. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, she hooked one arm over the edge, found a hold, and dragged them both up onto the narrow shelf of stone. They collapsed in a heap, gasping for air. Below them, the spot where they had been standing was now completely submerged in a raging, muddy river. They were out of the water, but they were far from safe. This tiny ledge was a temporary reprieve, a small island in a vertical ocean. Willa gently examined Ayana's ankle. In the strobing flashes of lightning, she could see it was worse than she thought, the skin stretched tight and bruised a sickening purple. The child couldn't put any weight on it at all. Even if the storm stopped and the water receded, getting Ayana back to her people would be a monumental task. "My father will find us," Ayana whispered, her voice hoarse. Willa nodded, a lie she couldn't bring herself to speak. The search party was miles away, looking in the wrong place, and the storm was intensifying, the rain coming down in blinding sheets. This ledge was their entire world, and it was a world that was shrinking by the minute. Willa pressed herself against the cold stone and looked up. She scanned the sheer cliff face above them, searching for any crack, any crevice, any hope. There, about 15 feet higher, barely visible in the dark, was a blacker patch of shadow, the mouth of a cave. If they could reach it, they might be able to find a way out, a tunnel that led to the surface. But the climb from this ledge to that cave was even more dangerous than the one they had just made, and it would mean leaving Ayana here, alone, on this narrow perch, injured and terrified. If Willa fell, if she couldn't make it, Ayana would be left to die here by herself, her last sight the rising water below. Thunder boomed, the sound so close it felt like the mountain itself was breaking apart. The water below surged, splashing against the ledge, soaking them anew. Willa looked at the small, broken child beside her, then up at the dark promise of the cave. It was a terrible choice, a gamble with a life that wasn't hers. But staying here wasn't a choice. It was a death sentence. "I have to go up there," Willa told Ayana, her voice shaking as she pointed to the opening. There might be a way out. Ayana's eyes widened, filling with a fresh wave of terror. "Don't leave me." The words were a tiny pleading whisper against the roar of the storm. "I will come back." Willa promised, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. I promise. But you have to be very still. Don't move. Can you do that for me? The little girl nodded, tears carving clean paths through the mud on her cheeks. Willa hated every part of what she was doing, but the water was already licking at the edge of their precarious sanctuary. Time was running out. The climb to the cave was a nightmare of burning muscles and frantic prayer. The rock face was nearly vertical, the handholds little more than pebbles and shallow cracks. Rain sluiced down the cliff, making every surface as slick as oiled glass. Loose stones, dislodged by her struggling ascent, clattered down into the darkness below. Twice, her fingers slipped. The first time, she managed to find a new hold, her nails scraping against the rock. The second time, her whole body swung out from the wall, held only by the trembling grip of one hand. For a long second, she dangled over the churning water, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Below, she could hear Ayana's soft, terrified sobs, a sound that gave her the strength to keep going. After an eternity of fighting for every inch, her fingers scraped against the rough edge of the cave floor. She hauled her exhausted body over the lip and collapsed inside, shivering and spent. The air was different here. It was still and musty, but there was a current, a faint but unmistakable flow of air brushing against her cheek. Her heart leaped. A draft meant an exit. She began to crawl forward into the absolute smothering blackness of the tunnel. Her hands, stretched out in front of her, felt nothing but rough stone floor and dripping walls. The passage was narrow, forcing her onto her stomach. It angled sharply upward, then opened into a space that felt larger, the sounds of her own breathing echoing slightly. She felt along the walls, her raw fingers searching until she found it. Another opening, this one leading further up and into the mountain. She squeezed through the second passage, her knees and elbows scraping on the sharp rock. The air was fresher here, the scent of rain and wet pine cutting through the stale, earthy smell of the cave. After minutes of blind, claustrophobic crawling, she saw it. A faint, ghostly gray light ahead. The passage opened out not into another chamber, but onto a small, hidden clearing on the surface, 50 yards from the lip of Devil's Hollow. She had found it. An escape. But her relief was short-lived. Getting herself through that narrow, twisting tunnel had been hard enough. Getting a child with a broken ankle through it would be a slow, agonizing, and perhaps impossible ordeal. She scrambled back to the cave entrance and peered down into the hollow. The ledge where she had left Ayana was now only inches from the surface of the water, which churned and foamed like a thing alive. Ayana looked up, her face a small, pale circle in the darkness. "I found a way out," Willa shouted over the storm. "But I have to pull you up. I need to lower a rope." She had no rope. Her makeshift line was still tied to the tree on the far side of the hollow. But she had her belt, her torn shirt, strips of leather from her pack. Working with frantic, clumsy fingers, she tore, tied, and knotted, fashioning a desperate, flimsy lifeline. It was barely long enough to reach the ledge, and looked as though a strong wind could tear it apart. The water was washing over the ledge as she lowered the line. Ayana grabbed the end with shaking hands, wrapping the cloth around her small wrists. Willa braced her feet against the cave wall, leaned back, and began to pull. The weight was immense, a dead weight that threatened to pull her right out of the cave. The makeshift rope stretched, the knots tightening with audible creaks. Halfway up the rock face, one of the knots began to give. A strip of cloth, torn from her shirt, started to slip. Willa's heart stopped. If that knot failed, Ayana would plunge into the water below and be swept away in seconds. Willa couldn't get back down to her in time. It would all be for nothing. The knot held, just barely. Willa heaved with a strength born of pure terror, her muscles tearing, her hands screaming in agony. She pulled, hand over painful hand, hauling the child up the cliff face, inch by agonizing inch. When Ayana's small body was finally level with the cave floor, Willa grabbed her under the arms and dragged her inside. They both collapsed, a tangled heap of mud, blood, and exhaustion. "Can you crawl?" Willa asked, her voice a raw rasp. Ayana tested her ankle and whimpered, but she nodded. They began the torturous journey through the tunnel, Willa leading, Ayana dragging herself behind. The passage was a long, dark throat, threatening to swallow them whole. Sharp rocks tore at them. The air grew thick, and Ayana began to panic, her breathing coming in short, shallow gasps. "We're almost there," Willa kept saying, a litany against the dark. "Just a little farther." When they finally tumbled out of the tunnel and into the clearing, the first hint of dawn was breaking through the bruised purple storm clouds. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The pale, gray light revealed the true cost of their survival. They were both caked in mud, their clothes in tatters, their skin a latticework of cuts and bruises. But they were alive. Ayana couldn't stand. Willa knelt down, ignoring the shooting pains in her own body, and helped the child onto her back. Then she began the long, slow walk back toward the tribal settlement. Every step was a fresh agony. Her shoulders burned from the climb, her hands were raw and bleeding, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion threatened to pull her down into the mud with every stride. The forest was a wreck. The storm had felled trees, blocking familiar paths, forcing her into long, time-consuming detours. Ayana felt heavier with each step, her small body limp against Willa's back. Twice, Willa had to stop, her vision blurring, just to check if the child was still breathing. As she crested a small hill, a sound cut through the drip of water from the trees. Voices. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The search party. They were still out there. She tried to call out, but all that came out was a dry, croaking sound. She stumbled forward, crashing through the undergrowth toward the voices. Through the trees, she saw them. 5 warriors, including the older man, Ayana's father, moving in a line, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on the ground. "Here," she croaked, the sound barely audible. "Over here." One of the younger warriors heard her. He spun around, his hand flying to the knife at his belt. His eyes widened in disbelief as he took in the sight of the battered, mud-caked girl carrying the chief's daughter on her back. He shouted a single word in his own language, a word that was equal parts shock and relief, and then they were all running toward her. The older man, Chief Takakota, reached her first. He took Ayana from Willa's back with a gentleness that was heartbreaking to watch, his weathered face cracking as tears streamed down his cheeks. He held his daughter close, murmuring her name over and over. The other warriors formed a circle around them, their hard faces shifting from suspicion to disbelief, and then to something that looked almost like reverence. Willa swayed on her feet, the world tilting crazily. The strength that had carried her through the night vanished all at once, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. She had done it. She had brought the child back. But as the darkness rushed in to claim her, one last thought flickered through her mind. She had saved the chief's daughter. But what happened when they found out what had been hunting her all night long? The tribal settlement was a blur of motion and sound. As Takakota carried his daughter through the center of the camp, people emerged from their dwellings, their faces a mixture of astonishment and joy. They stared at Ayana, then at Willa, the mud-caked white girl stumbling behind the warriors, whispering and pointing. The chief took Ayana into the largest dwelling, where an old woman with wise, kind eyes immediately began her work. Willa lingered at the entrance, feeling awkward and out of place. Her journey was over. She had done what she set out to do. She expected to be sent away now, a tool that was no longer needed. She was exhausted, bleeding, and trembling from cold. "Come," Chief Takakota said, his voice quiet but firm. He gestured for her to enter. The inside was warm and smoky, smelling of herbs and fire. The old woman, the tribe's healer, worked swiftly, cleaning Ayana's wounds and carefully binding her swollen ankle with poultices and soft leather. Willa watched from a dark corner, pulling a thin blanket around her shoulders, feeling like a ghost. But then a young woman brought her a wooden bowl filled with hot, savory broth. The simple act of kindness was so foreign, so unexpected, that it brought tears to her eyes. "She will be well," the healer announced, her voice resonating with authority. "The ankle is a bad sprain, but the bone is not broken. The cuts are clean. But another hour in that hollow." She didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what the end of that sentence was. Takakota turned to Willa. His dark eyes were piercing, seeming to look right through her skin and into her soul. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." So she did. In a halting, exhausted voice, she told them about the tracks, the trail of blood, the fall into Devil's Hollow. She described the rising water, the desperate climb to the ledge, the terrifying crawl through the dark cave. She left out her own fear, the moments she was sure they were both going to die. But she didn't leave out the other thing. "And the wolf," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. "It was there, at the top of the hollow. It was waiting for us. When we got out of the cave, it was still there. It tracked us, all the way back." As she spoke, the mood in the dwelling shifted. The warriors exchanged dark, troubled glances. Takakota's face, which had been filled with relief, hardened into a grim, unreadable mask. He spoke to his warriors in their own language, his words sharp and fast. They answered with grim nods. Willa's stomach twisted. She had seen the wolf. She wasn't lying. Why did they look at her like that? "You saw a wolf?" Takakota asked, his voice now dangerously quiet. "A large gray wolf with a scar above its left eye?" Willa nodded slowly. "Yes. How did you know?" Takakota stood up, his towering frame filling the dwelling. "Because the wolf you speak of is Akichita, and he would never harm my daughter." His eyes narrowed. "He is her protector." The air in the room grew thick with tension. It was a trap. This was all some kind of terrible trap. "He wasn't protecting her," Willa insisted, her voice trembling. "He was hunting her. The tracks were side by side. He was chasing her." "You are mistaken," one of the younger warriors said, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "Akichita has watched over the girl since she was a baby. He would die for her." "Then why did she run?" Willa shot back, her fear being replaced by a hot flash of anger. "Why was she so terrified?" Silence. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Takakota stared at her, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. He knew his daughter. He knew his wolf. But the story this strange, outcast girl was telling didn't make sense. And yet, she had brought Ayana back when his own men had failed. "There is more to this," the chief said finally, speaking more to himself than to anyone else. He looked at Willa, then at his daughter sleeping peacefully, then back at Willa. A decision was made. "The tribe will gather. We will hear the whole story, and we will find the truth." He led her out into the clearing. The entire tribe was assembling, their faces curious and suspicious. They formed a great circle around the central fire pit, their eyes all fixed on her. Willa had never felt so alone in her life. She had saved a child only to be put on trial by her people. She stood before them, muddy and broken, accused of a crime she couldn't even understand, her life hanging on the word of a child who was still lost in an exhausted sleep. The entire tribe stood in a silent circle as Chief Takakota led Willa to the center. The morning air was cold, but it was the icy stares of the people that chilled her to the bone. She was an outsider, a stray, and she had just told them that their beloved animal guardian was a monster. "This girl," Takakota began, his voice booming across the clearing, brought my daughter back from the jaws of the storm. For this, our debt is great." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But she also tells a story that is hard to believe. She says that Akechita, the guardian, the loyal one, was hunting Ayana like prey. A murmur of disbelief and anger rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Willa, hard and accusing. "I know what I saw," Willa said, her voice shaking but clear. The girl was running for her life. Just then, the flap of the healer's dwelling was pushed aside. Ayana, leaning heavily on the old woman, limped out into the circle. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright and alert. She saw her father, and then she saw Willa, and then her eyes scanned the crowd, searching. A low whine came from the edge of the forest. Out of the trees, a massive gray wolf emerged. It was beautiful and terrifying, its yellow eyes fixed on the child. A scar ran like a lightning bolt above its left eye. "Akechita!" The crowd parted respectfully to let it pass. The wolf padded silently into the circle and lay down at the chief's feet, its head on its paws, its eyes never leaving Ayana. "Ayana," Takakota said gently, kneeling before his daughter. "Tell us what happened. Do not be afraid." The little girl looked at the wolf and then at Willa. She pointed a small, trembling finger, not at the wolf, at Willa. "She saved me," Ayana said, her voice small but clear, "from the water." Then she looked at the wolf. "Akechita saved me. From the shadow." A confused silence fell over the tribe. "The shadow?" Takakota asked. "What shadow, my daughter?" "He was there," Ayana whispered, her eyes wide with memory. "In the woods, bigger than the wolf. He was chasing me." Willa's blood ran cold. Another set of tracks. She had been so focused on the child and the wolf, so sure of the story she was reading, that she had missed it entirely. A third party. Something else had been in those woods, something that had terrified both the child and her guardian wolf. "The wolf wasn't chasing her," Willa said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He was chasing it. He was trying to get between the girl and whatever was after her." The story suddenly snapped into focus. The panicked, circular tracks of the child. The wolf's tracks, not pursuing but herding, trying to turn her back. Ayana hadn't been running from the wolf. She had been running from something else entirely, and the wolf was desperately trying to protect her. He had been trying to save her, just as Willa had. One of the warriors who had been in the search party suddenly spoke up, his face pale. "Last night," he said, "while we were searching, we found tracks near the canyon. Not wolf, not bear. We thought it was nothing. A trick of the rain." Takakota looked at the warrior, then at Willa, and the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. His eyes filled with a dawning, profound respect. "You went into that darkness," he said to Willa, his voice filled with awe. "You faced the storm, the rising water, and what you believed was a ravenous wolf, all to save a child that was not yours." He turned to his people. "We were blind," he declared. "We searched for a child, but this girl, this stranger, she saw the truth of the danger. She did not run from the fear. She ran toward it. She has a courage our own warriors did not show." An elder stepped forward, holding a necklace of polished river stones and eagle feathers. It was a thing of great beauty and power. He approached Willa and, with a look of deep reverence, placed it around her neck. "From this day forward," Takakota proclaimed, his voice ringing with pride, "you are no longer a stranger. You are no longer homeless. You are Braveheart, sister to our people, guardian of the lost." A cheer erupted from the crowd. The suspicion in their eyes was replaced with admiration and gratitude. They saw her now, not as an outcast, but as a hero. Willa felt tears streaming down her face, not of sorrow, but of a joy so pure it was almost painful. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worthless. She was home. "The town of settlers cast you out," Takakota said softly, his voice for her alone. They saw an orphan. We see a warrior. We offer you a choice. Return to a world that never wanted you, or stay with a people who will forever honor you. Willa looked at the faces in the circle, at the small, smiling girl with the bandaged ankle, at the great gray wolf who was her fellow protector. She thought of the cold, lonely nights, and then she looked at the warmth of the fire. The choice was no choice at all. I will stay, she said, her voice strong and sure. The cheers rose again, a sound of welcome, of family, of belonging. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, bathing the valley in golden light, Willa knew her life of tracking and surviving was over. A new life, a life of purpose, had just begun. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of courage from the untamed frontier. Let us know in the comments what you think was the bravest thing Willa did. Your support helps us keep these stories alive.